Hello and welcome to another JavaFX application video. I think it's video number 8. Please correct me if I'm wrong. In this video I'm going to set up the GridPane and automate it for the using of creating the calendar. So that's basically what I'm going to do. If you do not understand what GridPane is, please do look at my previous video. I did explain how a GridPane works. It's basically a container, and I explained how it works. And so if you find it difficult to follow this video, you might find that you find it easier to understand the GridPane and why I'm doing what I'm doing in this video. So we are going to go right ahead and we're going to instantiate the GridPane. So GridPane, and we're going to call it GP calendar, and it is a new GridPane like so. And then we just need to import it, and it's the JavaFX layout. And then we've got to put this node, the GridPane which we've created, inside the border pane, and I'm going to put it in the center of the border pane. So if we just go right ahead, and after we've created the GridPane, we're going to call the border pane, and it's calendar dot, and it's set center. Yep, there we go, set center, and we're going to put the calendar in the center. So now that we've got the calendar in the center, we still won't be able to see anything because we basically have not actually started to create the GridPane yet. We have put the GridPane inside our calendar. And I just see that we've got two windows here called calendar, so I'm just going to go right ahead. Just quickly going to pop to the console, and we're just going to call this console. There we go. Some of you probably have figured that out a long time ago, but there we go. So that's sorted. Now that we have created the calendar, we've created the border pane and we've put it inside our, pardon me, we have created our GridPane and we have put it inside the center of the border pane. We can now start to create our grid. And I'm going to use a for loop. It's going to be like an automation, so we're going to call for loop, and I'm going to use the integer I, and we're going to set that I to 0, which is going to be the first column. And now there's 7 days in a week, so if I is smaller than 7, let's just leave a space there, we are going to increment I by 1. So we're going to run through that for loop until we have done that 7 times. And to just see how it works, we're going to say console.setText, and I'm going to say I equals, and I'm going to put the I integer in there so it increments through the I. So if we just run that, then if we start, you can see that the I has incremented itself 7 times, starting by the first time being 0. So we've run through the for loop 7 times, which is exactly what we want, and that will be the days in the week, because there's 7 days in the week. Now that'll be our columns, and then we need to do the rows for our GridPane. So we're going to use another loop inside our for loop, and this is called nested for loop. So, and we're going to use the integer, and because we've already used I, we need to use another one. So I'm going to use J, and I'm going to set it to, let's say, 6 weeks for now. It can be any amount of weeks, but because there's 4 weeks in a month, I'm just going to set it to 6 weeks for now, just so that we can see how our GridPane works. Okay, so if I is smaller than 6, then we have to mistake again, we do use J. Don't use I again, use J, and then we're going to increment J by itself, so 1. Increment J with 1 every time we run through the for loop, not by itself. So I'm not going to print this out to the console because that will probably just confuse you even more. However, this is where we're going to create the node, which we're going to put inside our GridPane. So we're going to create a node which is going to be a text, and I'm going to call this date because eventually it's going to be the date, and it's going to be a new text. Okay, and this text for now, I'm just going to set it to our I integer and our j integer, which is the coordinates for our GridPane. And you will actually see how the GridPane is laid out. So there we put the I, which is our columns. I've just added a space next to it to make it more readable, and the same in between the I and the J. And then also after the J I want to put a space because it'll just make it better, to see inside the GridPane. So if we just import the Java scene text there, and now that we've created the node, we are going to put the node inside the GridPane. So we call the GridPane, which is our calendar, and we're going to say dot add because we're going to add the node in each of those cells. There we go, and we're going to add the date, and I is going to be our column, J is going to be our row, and that is done. So now if we do run our application, you will see that our grid that we've created is automatically created, and there's our first cell, which is 0, 0. There's our next cell, which is column 1, row, 0. Well, it's actually, column 1, row 0. So that is 7, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's exactly what we want to have. Now, to make this even a little bit clearer, I'm going to put the grid lines in. So after we've created the GridPane, we're going to not before, because otherwise our programming language won't know what we're talking about, and we're going to call the calendar because we've created it. We're going to set the grid lines. It takes in a boolean. It's going to be true. And now if we run that application, we've set our grid lines. You can see very nicely how our grid is laid out. So there you go. If you can't understand what I've done in the background here, what I've done here with my code, where I've created the node and added it to GridPane, you can just watch my previous video because it does explain how the GridPane works. So I hope this was useful, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do not forget to like my video, and happy coding!